In a culture in which we really need feel-good stories, Elizabeth Holmes gave us one.
You founded this company 12 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Tell them how old you were.
I was 19. I was 9 years old when I wrote this, and it begins, "Dear Daddy, what I want out of life is to discover something new, something that mankind didn't know was possible. I also want to study about man and his ways. Life is really interesting. I love being with you. It's my most favorite thing in the whole world. Love, Elizabeth."
She was the youngest ever female billionaire, a tech inventor and genius who was revolutionising Silicon Valley and the health industry. She promised a new world in which all of our blood tests could be taken at home via a single droplet of blood. But the technology didn't work, and the only thing she invented was herself.
Elizabeth Holmes is the Stanford dropout who became a tech billionaire after claiming to revolutionize lab tests using a single drop of blood. Now she's keeping a very low profile as she faces a criminal trial.
What does the rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes say about women's issues in 21st century society? What does it reveal about ethics? What does it say about class and the power of stories? Who is Elizabeth Holmes?
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
To answer these questions, the AST Podcast has brought in scholars of literature, including an expert on another inventor, Great Gatsby. They will discuss how the events surrounding Elizabeth Holmes, when seen through the lens of the Great Gatsby, can tell us things about us and our world. Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the AST Podcast. We've got a fascinating episode today with Andrew Aven-Gillis and Jennifer Derwey, who are two scholars of literature. Andrew teaches it at Sacred Heart and has an MA in theatre from Emmanuel.
U of T.
From U of T. Yeah. Jennifer has a BA in English Literature from the Open University in England. And so we're going to be speaking about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, a recent scandal which exposes some really interesting things about American culture, life and psyche. And then Andrew is going to speak to us about The Great Gatsby, a classic, the great American novel, which offers a window not only into a time, but into an entire culture, into a certain aspect of humanity and human relations that I think provides us lenses for understanding what we've seen with the Theranos scandal. So that's the hope, that's the nature for our conversation. And we're going to begin by asking Jennifer just to fill us all in on what the Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos scandal is.
So Elizabeth Holmes was 19 at Stanford, and she goes and she has this idea, and the idea is that you can take the entire lab, a clinical lab for blood tests, and put it all into a tiny box, and that you could use less blood than is traditionally needed for this process. So this is the concept she comes up with. She goes to her professor, who's a female, and the professor kind of says, "I like this idea, but it's not really going to work out. But here's this other guy you can talk to," right? So she goes to the male professor who downs his tools, quits his job at Stanford, and goes to work with her. And she starts this company, which she calls Theranos. She meets a millionaire investor who helps her with this startup. Fortune magazine does a story about her. They comprise this board of billionaire investors who are politicians and powerful men in the country.
And so people there,
and
like
people,
Henry Kissinger,
yes,
former Secretary of Defense Schultz,
yeah.
Bill
They
Clinton
buy
was
into this idea, and so they have this powerful board. It grows from there. They get into Walgreens with these machines and with the blood samples. She takes on this identity of Steve Jobs. She adopts like that kind of persona, and she sells herself as this visionary, and people really buy into this narrative. What happens, though, is that when the Walgreens testing begins to happen, people are getting lots more blood taken than was told. They're not using the little nano containers that she had sold to them. They're getting vials and vials and vials of blood done. And they're asking why, and they're saying, well, it's because you asked for this specific test. And so from there, people start to get curious. Why is this process not what we were told that it was? And then people from within Theranos are also starting to question the process and start to recognize that there's a lot of division within the company, there's a lot of secretiveness within the company, and that things aren't quite, what they should be. And it dissolves from there, and it comes about that, the boxes weren't working, the Edison boxes. The idea of using a tiny sample wasn't actually possible to run any of these tests. They were using standard testing machines that they had purchased and were using within the lab themselves. So now the $9 billion company is worth nothing. Yeah, so that's
and
the
she's
story.
On trial.
And she is on trial. Her business partner, Sunny, is actually facing charges before her. So that's meant to sort of set a precedent of what will happen to Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, one of the really interesting things which put me in mind of Gatsby and made us want to get a Gatsby expert on to discuss some of this is that Elizabeth Holmes in many ways invented a persona. That she had this idea. The idea ultimately couldn't be made work, but it was an idea when matched with a persona which drew everyone in, got everyone on board, and made her one of the youngest billionaires in history. She's on the cover of Time magazine, etc., etc., etc. She developed an extremely deep voice. She wore nothing but black turtlenecks in a Steve Jobs style mode, and the legend or the myth of Elizabeth Holmes was really what captured the imagination. But as time went on, we saw that this myth or this image wasn't in keeping with the reality, and so this segues into Andrew, and hopefully, Andrew, you can just talk us through F. Scott Fitzgerald's great novel. Tell us a bit about it, because for many people, this is a novel which says something truly significant about America, American culture, the American psyche, which may be even as relevant today in these kind of issues.
Sure. Well, some interesting things right away. Twig from what you've just said, but I'll talk a little generally about Gatsby first, okay. and then we'll see where it goes. But so Fitzgerald is credited with writing, yes, you're quite right, the great American novel. It's often referred to in that way. And originally, apparently right before publication, he wanted to change the title to Under the Red, White, and Blue. Mm-hmm. So he was quite conscious of the fact that he was writing something that was supposed to be a statement about the whole country. And in 1926, the economy in the United States is as hot as it, probably ever had been up to that point. Mm-hmm. The stock market is roaring.
The roaring 20s.
Exactly, the roaring 20s, the jazz age, as it comes to be called later on. Everybody's excited about infinite possibilities. And his view on it is a little more skeptical.
Okay.
And it comes through in his characterization of that time period. So Gatsby is a self-made man. He's absolutely a character who succeeded in adopting the style, the speech, affected speech, in order to reach people, to make them think that he has an education background that he didn't. And he tells outright lies in order to persuade people and convince people. His goal is a very romantic one, as we're told by Nick Carraway, the narrator. Mm-hmm. And eventually, Nick finds out that this is all about trying to get a woman back in his life, a woman that he once had a relationship with, named Daisy, that he wants to get back. And more particularly, he doesn't just want to be back in a relationship with her. It's like he wants to go back in time to where they were together, to erase everything that had happened since. And of course, this quest, this impossible quest, is doomed for failure. We're given lots of indications of that. The way Fitzgerald foreshadows the events later on. And there are a lot of accidents that happen along the way, literal and figurative, that cause disaster for many people, ultimately for Gatsby himself. It's predicated on this idea that you can make yourself into whatever you want. If you go with the American dream, it's the idea, right? So he starts off when he's a young man. He's living in Minnesota. He's digging clams on the beaches to make his money. His parents are poor farmers, uneducated. He takes some night classes, scrapes together enough money to learn a few things, but doesn't do very well. He's stuck in poverty. And it's the First World War that gives him the opportunity to get some training, get a uniform, and as a young man, change his class essentially by putting on that uniform and starting to associate with different people. And so that's when he originally met Daisy, this woman of his dreams, a woman who was, in terms of class, completely out of his league. So his aspirations to return to that innocent time when they were together, they were a couple, is what sort of motivates him throughout apparently everything else. Now, what he does in order to do that, in order to make his money, is where we get into interesting questions of morality. And it's fascinating teaching this to teenage boys, as I do right now, because the question of, well, is there anything that should inhibit you when it comes to, deciding I'm going to try to make my first million or whatever? And if something is only borderline legal, is that okay? We certainly have lots of examples of that being kind of celebrated in pop culture today.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So they don't quite often touch or connect with that aspect of how his whole empire is really corrupt at the heart of it.
Yeah.
But it's about the question of whether you can do this with impunity, whether you can go out and do whatever you need to do to make the money and still have essentially a pure soul.
Gotcha.
And a romantic idealism. Is it possible for that to coexist? And certainly we're given characters by Fitzgerald who are much more reprehensible in the novel than Gatsby is. Right. Gatsby seems, from Nick's point of view, he's the one guy who is worthy of admiration even after all of the bad things happen. He still admires him. We see other characters who are not admirable at all.
One of the themes that I very much wanted to pick up in the second half is precisely that theme of what is ethical in the name of capital, because I think Theranos, her ethical lens is largely that of Steve Jobs, who in some ways fakes it until he makes it technologically, but she does that in the healthcare sphere, which kind of has other stuff. But that exactly, and I'm really interested to see what what young teenagers in 2019 make of that kind of question. But before we finish our first half, I'm really interested in that, in what you were saying there about the American dream, and the sense that anyone can be anything, because this seems to be a trope that I'm thinking actually of the talented Mr. Ripley, right, which again explores that idea, whether you can fake this thing, and to what extent you can, but ultimately is, and you think of Spike Lee's Malcolm X, where he's giving that speech. He says, we're told about this, but ultimately we've been hoodwinked. Yeah. We've been bamboozled. There's a deeper game that's at place here, whether it's class, whether it's old money, whatever, which actually, which makes a lie of this American dream that we're telling ourselves to justify inequality and things like that. And so because this is just prior to the Wall Street crash and everything, and so Fitzgerald doesn't buy that, or does he?
He buys, I think, that you can try.
Right.
You can, and that in the United States, probably unlike many other countries in 1926, there are opportunities there where you can sell yourself as a new kind of person who transcends those boundaries. But Gatsby is surrounded by people who are judging him by class. You've got the old money of East Egg, looking at the part of Long Island where their homes are older, and they look down on Gatsby and his parties. They might still go to his parties, but they wouldn't want to associate with him. They wouldn't invite him around for lunch, or if they did, as it happens in one point, they don't mean it. They don't actually want you to come to the party, right?
But you also mentioned, Gatsby putting on the uniform, and that's when he first meets Daisy, right? That sort of allows him to elevate himself a little bit. Yep. And so I'm wondering, like, for a 19-year-old, male or female, how many uniforms they might try on of different personas and personalities to see which one will make them the most successful. So Elizabeth Holmes tries on Steve Jobs, right? Like, who else? Like,
sure.
if you're gonna aim high, and it works for her, and people start to respect her, and to give her attributes that she might not actually have, because of the uniform that she's wearing. And so I'm wondering, like, is there an element there too of putting on a personality, and because she's female, putting on this sort of, maybe asexual personality, trying to wear the black turtleneck and saying, I'm above these things, I'm not, and lowering her voice a little bit, whether or not that's natural, I don't know. But just to portray yourself as something that you are not inherently, that element might have something to do with her success.
So a question I have right away about that. So did she fake it fully expecting that she would make it? That this would eventually pan out? That her design, her concept for this kind of blood testing was a matter of just time and experimentation?
Yeah, I think that's the idea. That ultimately, if you can fool people long enough to buy yourself the time, that the technology will catch up with the dream. Like, I think she doesn't seem to me to have had some sort of mastermind, evil plan. I really think that she believed that eventually the Edison would work. That if we just keep putting in money, if we keep getting people involved, eventually it's all going to work out. The problem is that, as in Gatsby, people were getting hurt along the way. There were stories of cancer patients who were in remission that would get a test from Walgreens showing that a new tumor had come back, and then they would go to their hospital and get lab work done, and they'd say, no, actually, that tumor isn't there. So people's health and their lives were at stake. So I think she did believe that eventually it might get there. I think that's what everyone wanted.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think and one of the really interesting things, from my point of view, is that she is, which is the posh one, East Egg? Yeah,
she's from East Egg.
Yeah, she's from East Egg. Her stock is a kind of a Brahmin stock. And that gives her all these connections, and that gives her this elevation. And so she has a situation which is very similar to other capitalists who've made it massive, is that I've now got this massive amount of money, and if I can hire enough clever people and I can beat them into making this for me, I can make it work. And so Steve Jobs has an idea, and he puts in place horrific working conditions in Chinese factories to make this product for him, and brutalizes employees in order to force them into this thing, and then they produce the product. And that's a kind of her goal. But ultimately, unlike Steve Jobs, her vision isn't doable with the technology we have at this time. But once again, we ask ourselves, is the American dream an absolute fallacy? Because if a kid from South Central LA, even at Stanford, if a kid at South Central LA, without that background, without those big unblinking blue eyes, without that tall slim build, without that blonde hair, if a different kid, a racial minority, had this idea, no one has ever heard this name. There's nothing that could be done. You have to have access to capital, to class, or to, I think, the kind of boomer vibe that Steve Jobs creates. And so he's not simply gaining funding for a product, he's gaining funding for an ideology.
Right.
He's weaponizing John Lennon and Bob Dylan and the Beatles and the Spirit of Woodstock and and Haight-Ashbury and all these things into saying, come and be part of this movement. And because he's able to invent this ideology, he's able to put this into practice. And so again, what we have is access to ideology, access to capital, or access to birth and standing, which determines one's capacity for success. And if she could have forced these largely Asian technicians into making what she wanted to make, she would be poster on people's walls. She was already sitting with Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton was speaking about how she's one of the people she most admires in the world, which is sort of really indicts, and this is, I think, the thing that the Carraway sympathetic portrayal of Gatsby constantly challenges, because Gatsby does have significant gifts, doesn't he?
He does, and interestingly, in his case, he was groomed by someone who saw in him the potential. So
right.
after the First World War, Meyer Wolfsheim, a gangster who in the book is attributed with fixing the 1990 World Series,
Arnold Watstein
picks him out and says, "Here's the guy who can sell essentially anything.
Right.
Yep.
And if we set him up the right way, we're going to be successful."
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of different plot intervolutions that I won't try to get into, that caused Gatsby not to return from the war to Daisy. But Gatsby's goal of just amassing enough wealth that he could be significant marries perfectly with Meyer Wolfsheim's vision for what he could do. And we're never given the specific details of how they pull it off, but there's the implication, first of all, that it's during Prohibition, so it's bootlegging.
Yep.
It sounds like a very organized and sophisticated bootlegging, which is selling through drugstores. Actually, I was thinking about the Walgreens connection there.
Yes.
Because at one point, one of the other characters says sarcastically, "I hear you can buy anything at drugstores nowadays." Right. So there's that. He's making his money through alcohol, but we meet him at a point where he's about to transition from bootlegging into some kind of illegal bond business.
Right.
So selling bonds, maybe false bonds. It's not entirely clear. In regional centers, not major centers. And you get this sort of series of interruptions that happen where he gets a wire from Chicago or a wire from Detroit that interrupts him in the middle of a conversation with someone, where he hears a bit of information. You're able to piece it together that he's up to something new, illegal, that's going to be even bigger.
Can you speak to us, because in the second half I want us to focus on issues like feminism and ethics, but one final issue that I'm really interested in is nostalgia, which I think Steve Jobs, for example, draws heavily on. But that wonderful idea that you suggested is that Gatsby is not simply looking to reunite with Daisy, he's looking to re-inhabit a different time.
Yes.
And this seems to be a really potent thing in American culture as well. Like, I think of Ken Burns and his success in the nostalgia business, and you think of Member Berries and sort of the cult of Remember When, and how this plays into the American dream and the American psyche. Can you tell us a bit more about nostalgia in Gatsby?
So in the case of Gatsby, it's a little difficult to tell whether the nostalgia is primarily from Gatsby himself, or whether it's Nick Carraway as the narrator who is applying it to some extent. He's the one who frames it as this impossible quest. Right. He's the one who sees it that way. But it's a part of the concept that, the American dream starts for most white Anglo perspectives on it with the arrival of settlers who look at, as he describes at the end of the book, this incredible opportunity, these green forests that go on. He calls it a green breast of the new world, like this idea that everything's possible here. And there's nothing, and never mind the indigenous peoples who are undoubtedly living there, right? That's not even part of the factor. But it's this idea that every possibility is there for you, and also it does suggest, regardless of class or background or whatever, you've got this possibility, this potential. But as he goes on to say at the end of the novel, doesn't matter how much you try to reach to go ahead, you're being taken back into the past.
And I wonder how much of that is just the American narrative from the beginning of those settlers arriving. There's the book My Antonia by Willa Cather, who's an American author, and she's writing about homesteading and moving west throughout America. And she has this wonderful line where she looks out the window as a young girl and says she didn't see a country, but the stuff countries are made of. Right? So for her, this place didn't even really exist, but it had all the raw materials, that green breast of a countryside to make whatever you wanted out of it. And I'm wondering, are we stuck? I'm American. Am I stuck trying to recreate something in a space because I have the tools, but I don't have a storyline or a narrative to move me forward? So is nostalgia part of the very beginning of it? Or what are we nostalgic for if we're just reinventing this new place? It
seems to be linked to wonder for Fitzgerald, right? Like this idea, he talks about this capacity for wonder. So if you're able to look at whatever opportunity that's in front of you and see potential. So maybe you see the stuff of a country. Maybe you see a mission to Mars. It's that that's that margin that you're always going to be reaching for. That does seem to be tied in some way to the concept of progress and productivity, right? And I can't help but think of visions of Star Trek with blood tests. If your dream is we're going to have
that
this
little
thing
stick where
that we just go like that and we know what your problem is. I mean, of course you can easily it's easy for me to imagine how you might trick yourself into thinking what I'm imagining here is going to help so many people. Let's fudge the reality for a while until we're actually able to make it come true.
Apologies, we because of the very interesting things that Andrew and Jennifer were saying, we went a fraction over on that first half, and so in this second half I do definitely want us to touch on feminism and ethics. But the things that you were saying there about the American dream and nostalgia, I think are tremendously interesting, because it seems to me in a sense that this great breast
it's one that sticks in your mind. And it really sticks in the minds of the teenage boys.
The green breast of a country.
Because they're like, what? What's that all about? But no, it's this idea of potential, of incredible potential. But obviously the fact that they're associating like childhood nourishment with that.
Of course,
and, I mean, it's like this. It is an odd image.
But it's so potent.
The birth of something, the birth of potential.
And so too, my Antonia's image of the stuff that countries are made out of. And so we have this idea that the American dream seems to be this pure potentiality, and there's a sense in which many of these investors, who are largely older white men, are investing because it triggers that. It triggers that a sort of that nostalgia, which is also excitement for this massive Aladdin's cave of cash and glory and wealth that they can have. And it's also a little bit interesting to me as well that currently, and hopefully this will change, but currently this investor class, this top 1%, are largely the genetic descendants of people who bought into this dream, people who had a fairly safe, stable life in Germany or Ireland or wherever, and went, I'm going to gamble all this for this great green breast, for this stuff that the countries are made out of. So
they're risk takers by nature.
And so they're risk takers by nature, but for that. And Jobs and Gats and Holmes seem to be either made a god in this case of Steve Jobs, or a demon in the East Egg version of Gatsby, or the or how we feel about Holmes, when all they do is simply express that, embody that, and seek to actualize that, which I think is interesting.
Well, I think in the case of Elizabeth, because she's female, there is another
We're on
element.
feminism now.
there is another element there. You know, she, and just to clarify, her first investor, Sonny, is not Caucasian. He's Pakistani. So
Was he her first investor?
I think so. Yeah, they met when she was 19.
Check it, folks. Check it.
They met when...
I think you'll find it was Schultz, but nonetheless.
Okay. They met when she was 19 and Sonny was 37. Yeah. And eventually started a romantic relationship. But she is capable of telling the story and selling the story in a way that Sonny can't, and that those other powerful, rich men can't. Why do they buy into her story without fact-checking as much as they maybe would have if she was male? That element, I think, is because if she's successful, it proves that capitalism works. It proves that their greed is all okay because she's female, she's young. They attribute her with virtues. They say she doesn't have a boyfriend, she's married to her job, which wasn't the case, but nonetheless, she's the virgin queen. She's married to England, she's married to Theranos, and she can carry that narrative. And if she's successful, it's almost like paying for indulgences. Then it excuses all of their past sins.
It's ethical carbon offsets.
It's ethical, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about, so there's two things that I'm interested in here. One is the way that she, by virtue of her, what many people have called her ingenuousness, we think of these massive, big, saucer-sized blue eyes, which for some reason don't blink. And she seems to seek out older male patrons to fund, and how that, again, it seems to me to be in a non-sexual way. It's not a seductive thing. It seems to me that she positions herself as their daughter, and develops this paternalistic affection in them, which lead to them supporting her no matter what.
I think you could argue that that's symbiotic, that it's not just her sort of trying to weasel her way into this position. You know, maybe not consciously, but it's also maybe a desire in those investors to find this person, to find the young female, you know, goddess that can elevate their status as human beings, because they're already at the upper echelon. So now what they need is kudos, they need clout, they need to be the people that supported this young, brilliant female. So I think that they find each other. I don't know if it's that she is specifically seeking out men. I think in the university, she certainly went to the female professor who said no, and did the female professor see through the story more than the male professor because of her sex? I don't know, right? So why was the female professor less likely to support and to nourish this idea and to help it grow, whereas the male professor really fanned the flames? You know, I think that the persona she adopted took on masculine attributes, and so we can see that in Margaret Thatcher and her shoulder pads, and, you know, always portraying herself as tough. And we see that you know, in female politicians today in the United States. We see it in Hillary Clinton. You know, it's rare for a woman in the West to look very female and feminine, to portray herself that way, and to find herself in a position of power.
Well, I think that's really interesting, but I think we need not even speak in terms of gender universalism or stereotypical traits. I think I'm uneasy about the way the media, and so HBO have done a series on her, and there's a movie coming out with someone, and all those things. I'm uneasy with the way that we demonize her for inventing herself, we assume that her voice is affected,
Right.
her dress is affected.
Yeah.
She told a story constantly about her uncle, that she lost her uncle to cancer and he was her favourite uncle, and so on and so forth. And people know how often she told this story, and they see her as being extremely manipulative, which again is a classic misogynistic like trope, which I'm uneasy with. But I'm uneasy with the demonization of her for inventing herself, when, to my mind, like Gatsby, the only way one can have access to this is if you can speak a certain way, if you can use certain slang, if, you know, sport this, sport that, or whatever, you know, if you can look a certain way, if you have the right kinds of art on the wall, and then, God forbid, your lack of taste would sort of, you know, would show through, you know. But there's a sense in which, in order for her to succeed in this world, which is male-dominated world, the world of investment at that level, that she has to invent and become the kind of persona that would attract this. And so she literally models herself on Steve Jobs, who did this, you know? Yeah. And while we see this as being manipulative, maybe one of the things that we should be doing is looking at ourselves and looking at the culture of investment capital, and looking at the way in which one has to do this because certain kinds of people, often women, minorities, etc., can't have access. And so this invention of oneself is necessary, and that indicts us that it is necessary. You know, is that fair? Or
I don't think you know, for me, I don't fault her for wearing the black turtlenecks or for, you know, wearing the big blue contact lenses or any of those things. She, either because of her own pressing or because of the way she's interpreted by the people who write about her, or the male journalist who wrote the Fortune story, comes across as the tortured genius, right? So she doesn't sleep and she doesn't have relationships, and it's those sort of attributes, I think, that are more what propels her narrative than the turtleneck and those sorts of things. I understand what you're saying, that she has to model herself a certain way, but how many young people right now are shifting between different personalities and styles to try and find the one that sort of fits and brings you the most success.
Everyone's looking for the shorthand that is going to communicate, I am a unique whatever, fill in that.
Right.
Yeah. And how many, and this might hopefully segue into some discussion of ethics, and I'm really interested in what teenage boys in an increasingly get-rich-or-die-trying world make of this. But how many people do we think in various industries have developed and sold substandard products, and they haven't become Elizabeth Holmes? Like, I don't know the name. So, for example, when Samsung sold phones that exploded, I don't think there's been a HBO special about the Samsung guy or gal who was responsible. I can imagine there are countless weapons, aircraft, bombs in the field who have faulty fuses, whatever it is. But we don't absolutely demonize. But for some reason, Elizabeth Holmes is at the intersection of a whole host of our prejudices. And so therefore we see her, I hate her. I don't want to name and shame you, but I remember when you were watching the show, and you were the documentary, and you were not. There was something about her, perhaps because she comes from a Brahmin class, because she's tall, skinny, and blonde, or whatever. But there was a kind of a sense in which, look at all the advantages she has. This just makes me sick.
Visceral.
Yeah, like it was very real.
I think it's because we all wanted it to be true so bad.
Okay.
You know, we really wanted the altruistic, visionary female CEO doing something good for the betterment of mankind. We all really wanted that to be true. So if it's not true, it hurts in a lot of different ways. So you'll see articles coming out now saying HBO, these are the 10 women CEOs in Silicon Valley that you should have done a special about, you know, like, and so they're trying to like come back and say, you know, it damages because of where we are. It damages all female narratives that are struggling to try to get investment.
So when Sarah Palin winks at the camera and women are angry, it's because what she is doing to override all the progress that's been made by women over decades. Okay.
You know, because she's a representative of women. Yeah. When you have a male politician wink, he's not representative necessarily of men. You know, and so we're in a narrow margin right now in those fields, and because of that, every person in the spotlight is representative of the rest of us, and I think that's why the reaction was so strong.
Gotcha.
You know, and because the fall is so much greater.
Gotcha. So if an Irish person gets drunk and fights in the streets,
why'd you do that?
You know, absolutely.
There is a lot of winking in the political realm right now by men too. I think about Trump and everything that he does. It's a constant but
it's interpreted very differently.
No, I agree. But I'm just thinking like the sort of the fiction, you know, to come back to Gatsby, the idea that you're this persona. I'm not really what I am by appearance. I'm not too concerned about being caught. That's another thing that comes through with Gatsby in many ways. He pushes that. He wears a pink suit, which is just not supposed to happen if you have taste. And he knows that. He has fake books on his bookshelves that he doesn't bother to cut the pages to show that he's read them, and you know, that's considered admirable by somebody who reads. He looks at them. He didn't actually bother to cut the pages. That's impressive that he would go that far with the show and not bother to go all the way with it. So I wonder, there's something about that when we're thinking about authenticity, obviously when it comes to healthcare, authenticity is everything. And I think for me, I think that's, you know, I don't know very much about this at all. I'm learning along the way here. But it seems to me like if it comes to healthcare and you find out that it's a sham,
that's serious stuff.
Demonization kind of follows because it's not just you, it's your grandmother, it's your whatever. You're thinking of the people you care about. So
I'm sure it's impossible to generalize, but can you tell us a little bit about how young men in the 21st century assess the capitalism, the ethical and legal murkiness of Gatsby? How do they respond to that?
Well, teaching at a boys' school right now, again, to mention Trump, who, by the way, I usually say we don't talk about him in class because it's just like the minute you do, it's going, exactly. But the influence that that kind of, I guess the political culture associated with that has had on what young men think they're supposed to be doing as, you know, a potential leader in their class or whatever. They think, okay, well, this is how you get people to listen, you know, by be shocking in some way or be inappropriate in another or whatever. Find an opportunity to get a headline really is, and so it's had an effect in that way. Books like The Great Gatsby call into question, you know, the ethics of the person. You know, what is the ethical standard that you want to live to, and why? Like, why make that choice? I have my grade 12 students read an address by David Foster Wallace called "Way More Than Luck." It's his commencement speech, essentially, to Kenyon College at one point.
Right.
And he tells them, look, a lot of schools tell you need to learn how to think, and that's kind of insulting. You already know how to think. You've got ways of thinking through things, but it's choosing what you're going to think about that matters. And yes, you know, in a private school environment for boys who have ideas about success and aspirations and goals, there is a package that goes with that. That is, I'm going to follow in these footsteps, or I'm going to go for the big dollar, whatever it is, and that's how you measure it. but they're thinking, feeling human beings. And if you ask them, well, what do you care about? Like, what are the things well, I care about my friends. I care about how people treat other people. Like, when it comes down to it, they're not willing to sell out.
Right.
So
right.
if you're able to find ways to engage them around that idea, that maybe they're going to have to make hard choices, maybe not going after the dollars and always the right choice.
You know, and do they, you know, you and Jennifer have both been flagging the fact that we all invert personas and we invent personas and we all adopt masks, and within a teenage culture in which people are navigating those waters, surely it's fascinating to see how they're responding to Gatsby, who is playing these games, and can you tell us a little bit about that, about the ethics of invention, you know, the ethics of self invention. You know, again, I think, and this is just coming to me now, though, but in some ways, The Talented Mr. Ripley could be seen as sort of a dystopian Great Gatsby, you know. But that sort of scene at the end where he, for fairly prudent Machiavellian reasons, has scratched out the face with the dad of the Jude Law character in the movie, says this is a sort of a cry for help. This is a sort of a, you know, that he's a sort of, that he feels he has no true self, and so the question then becomes, what mask do I wear? Yeah. Elizabeth Holmes is thinking, you know, there is no, I can put my hand through my body and soul and out the far side, so who do I become? You know, who am I called to be? And I'd say Gatsby is an amazing resource for young men who are trying to navigate those waters. Am I the shy bookish type? Am I the prankster? Am I the, you know, the assertive alpha type? You know, and so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, there definitely there are moments where the students have a chance to look at a character like Gatsby and say, he's out to lunch. Like, you can't repeat the past. That's ridiculous. Yeah. And then, you know, it gives us an opportunity to talk about, well, are you nostalgic for any particular event in your relatively short life spans of ours? There's something that you'd love to go back to. And, you know, a lot of them will have a Christmas vacation or a moment in time that they're able to say, like, oh, that was just perfect. Everything was perfect. And I was like, if you could go back to that, would you? Yeah. You know, and without hesitation, absolutely, no problem. Yeah. If you could bottle that and sell it, you know, would people go for that? Of course they would. I think trying on different personas is sort of, in a way, what kids are doing all the way through their education, one way or another. It's like, I'm going to imagine myself as this kind of a person for a while and see how that works. And I tell the grade 9 boys that I teach that we're frequently told as teachers, particularly English teachers, it's our job to get the empathy thing sorted out, right? Like, go and, you know, give them this book and they'll feel empathetic afterwards, right? But I mean, obviously the goal of any English teacher is to have them experience through literature some kind of other reality, to be able to imagine what it would be like. And sure, if that involves trying out a new personality for a while or imagining themselves in a new way, then I think that's okay. Yeah.
I think, you know, there's a bit of a crisis of identity in the United States. It's still a young country. The people that live there and grew up there, I moved around to 3 different places before we finally settled on one location, and that's not unusual for families across the United States. We really only are the story that we're telling ourselves, because we're not surrounded by these visual cues that will tell us, okay, these are the same steps that your grandparents and great-grandparents walked, or this is the same place. We don't have those sort of sensory things to constantly reinforce a deeper, older narrative. So I find that it's usually more fashionable, more contemporary than in other cultures, because we're easily swayed by the things that we're attracted to. So whether that's success, or whether that's being funny, or it's going to be, you know, being attractive, or these different things, we're constantly sort of moving with that tide, because we don't have an older ancestry around us all the time.
Do you see a difference in Canada? Like, if you is that something that you've picked up on?
Nova Scotia is a little bit different.
Old Nova Scotia.
Yes. So I've experienced living in Nova Scotia. We've been here for 11 years now. And there are still many families that will ask me what my last name is when they meet me, and as if that will somehow tell them something about me.
Whole thing right there.
That they'll know all of a sudden. Whereas that doesn't really happen in the United States at all. But so in Nova Scotia is a little bit different in that sense, and I think unique in that regard. So I can't speak to the whole of Canada, but Nova Scotia has much more connection to the past. There's still, I mean, even after 11 years, I still consider myself, an immigrant. I come from away. Right. I'm not from Nova Scotia, so I can't speak to that. What do you think? Do you think Canadians have that?
Well, I think in Canada it is interesting. Our connection to the British Empire is something that is obviously strongly there throughout the telling of our story. And we're at an interesting place, I think, right now in terms of telling ourselves what the story of Canada is, because we love being the nice country, right? The nice version of whatever country you want to compare us to. We want to be the people who did it right, like, 2008 didn't happen here the same way, whatever. Like we're constantly referencing those sorts of things. But are we free to change and to adapt? Certainly the positive energies associated with the United States, the cultural concept of creation and invention, it is not as strong here. I think that's true. And being married to an American, we've had many conversations about this where, she's encountered resistance to change, and sometimes we'll look at that and go, okay, I think that's rooted in some kind of British colonial thing. We can't put our finger right on it, but there is something about that. We're proud of our traditions, but right now I think in Canada it's a great opportunity for us to reevaluate those traditions and how we ended up where we are today.
Or you'll be born ceaselessly back into the past.
Exactly. Wow.
Great way to conclude. Andrew Aven-Gillis, thank you so much for coming along. Jennifer Derwey, thank you so much for coming along. And to you, our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Please do like, subscribe, share, and all that good stuff. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.